And welcome back to Coaching with the Bible. This week, the reading of Miketz, the holiday of Chanukah, is upon us. Overall, episode number 64 and number 10 in series 2. Our topic this week, team building part 2. Last year at about this time, we discussed the issue of team building, and specifically we focused on dysfunctional teams. We talked about how the cohort of the brothers, the 12 tribes, the 11 tribes at the time, really did not function as a team. What broke down, what the issues were, what was holding them back, what made it impossible for them to really operate. And we raised the notion of the book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, as the core learning in there in terms of how to build teams. And this year, I'd like to go back to that subject from a slightly different vantage point. The story of Joseph in the court of Pharaoh is the stuff of Hollywood. There's no other way to sort of explain how that story happens, right? How that's even possible, how that is more of either rags to riches kind of a thing, the tragedy, the hero story, Joseph rising effectively from the ashes, literally from a pit, to now being the leader, it's hard to fathom, right? Other than the fact that it's there in the Bible and we read it every year and we know this story, that's how Hollywood stories happen. The chance that Pharaoh would pick this person to become the leader, almost zero. The chance that this person could rise from that level of depth, from that level of despair, to be the number 2 person in the most powerful kingdom in the world, almost zero. And in truth, when initially preparing for this week and really reviewing, that was really where I was focused on, is the despair, the idea that we can rise from the ashes. I think it's a very powerful message, certainly an incredibly encouraging, meaningful coaching message, and certainly for the timing of the year around the holiday season of Chanukah, when the odds are stacked against a person, it seems to be wholly appropriate. But I want to go a little bit further and ask the following question, and this gets us into the team building question. What in the world was Pharaoh thinking? I never really thought of it from that perspective until this year. But as I was working it through, I asked myself that question. I ask you that question. Other than the idea that God is operating behind the scenes, or if you're a believer, then you see the hand of God in all these moments, what is it that drives Pharaoh to make this hire right now? There are a lot of smart people in Egypt. He has a lot of smart advisors, a lot of very powerful, very talented people who play the role of advisor for the Pharaoh. And yes, maybe they didn't interpret the dream per se the way Joseph does. That doesn't mean that they couldn't then lead the project of handling a famine, handling the abundance in those first 7 years and how to manage that whole thing. But it is that Pharaoh hires Joseph. And that was my question. Why is it that Pharaoh hires Joseph? What's happening in there? And there's an interplay. And at certain moments, if you're reading the story without knowledge, right, that's something we talk about a lot, is the idea of the curse of knowledge. We know how this plays out, but if you're reading it for the first time, you have no idea that that's going to be the result. As you're reading through the story, it's already amazing that Joseph is brought up into the court of Pharaoh. It's amazing that he is being given the opportunity to speak before the Pharaoh, to interpret the dreams before the Pharaoh. And if that was it, that would be a lot. And then it shifts gears in verse 33. Chapter 41, verse 33, Joseph moves from dream interpretation into advisor, into strategist, into industrial planner, manager, all these things in that moment. And you could focus in on just that part of Joseph. But if you flip it over and ask it from the perspective of Pharaoh, so then you have a new look. It's a new vantage point. Put yourself in his seat. Be Pharaoh for a moment. And think about what he's thinking about in this moment. And ask yourself, is this the guy? Is this the person? Or what do I need? Perhaps is a better question first. What do I need to make this work? I when I started to think about it, it just brought so many questions to bear because I love actually talking about Pharaoh. I love learning about Pharaoh. I love reading about the pharaohs. It's such an interesting topic for us. And what I realized is that Pharaoh is having a moment here. You want to call it just a spiritual moment? You could. I don't think it's just a spiritual moment. Pharaoh's having a leadership moment right here. And in this leadership moment, he realizes that he's not the guy to lead this project. He'll take the credit. He'll be the Pharaoh. He'll always be the ultimate power. And it always will be his power. But he's not the guy to lead this project, to manage it. And so it has to be somebody else. And he's looking at a guy who just gave him an explanation of the dreams that was better than everybody else's, that was more accurate than everybody else's, and the one that he believes is the true explanation of his dreams. Rabbi Don Yitzchak Abarbanel, Isaac Abarbanel, explains that the reason that that's true is because Joseph's explanation stays close to the truth in terms of the sense that the person dreaming always seems to have a belief that they know what the interpretation is, but it's just beyond their grasp. And then when they hear it, all things click into being. So Joseph tapped into that space for Pharaoh. It clicked. It made sense for him. It worked. Beyond that, the notion that many commentaries bring about is that Joseph understood here something deeper for Pharaoh, which was the idea that in the interpretation it could not be personal. Pharaoh was bigger than the personal. And he was a godlike figure. And he was responsible for the largest kingdom dynasty in the world at the time. And so anything he's dreaming about is bigger, grander, larger, wider than just his own person. And it goes to what his role is in the world. And so what I think that Pharaoh is doing is Pharaoh is hiring the team that's going to do this project. And he's hiring the leader for this project. And Joseph has put himself into an incredible position to be chosen to be the leader of this project, following a hiring strategy that only comes to bear and to the fore to the language that we use in the modern world under the guise of what is known as hungry, humble, smart. Some of you listeners have heard this from me because I've talked to you about it personally in your own work when you're hiring people and you've struggled to figure out who the right people are. How do I figure that out? How do I assess? How do I go about understanding people's skill sets? All those different things. And it was very difficult until we employed a very simple and basic strategy for hiring called Hungry, Humble, Smart. Hungry, Humble, Smart comes to the world from the same guy who brought us the 5 dysfunctions of a team, Patrick Lencioni. We've mentioned multiple times in the course of Coaching with the Bible. He is a very well-known management consultant, and another one of his books is called The Ideal Team Player. And at the core theory of that book is the idea of hiring for hungry, humble, smart. And I first came across it a number of years ago when I had to hire people. And I was asked, well, how do you hire? What's your strategy for hiring? And the truth is, at the time, I didn't have one. And so I scrambled and was looking for something that was simple, that was easily implementable as a strategy and as a structure. And Hungry, Humble, Smart fit that bill. And I'm going to show you exactly how that works. I'm going to show it to you in the story. It's going to take a couple extra minutes today, so bear with me as we talk about this. But I do think this is super valuable for you in your hiring. We're not looking to hire ourselves. We're not looking to hire people in these leadership roles who are just going to be yes people. We're looking to hire people who can get the job done, who can succeed, who can really work with other people, and who can move us forward. That's sort of what we're looking for. And so the question becomes, how do we sort of find that? And Hungry, Humble, Smart is exactly that. So there's a PDF, and it's available on Pastor Lencioni's website, his company website, the table group, that simply just lays out like what this looks like and how this works and what those definitions are. So Hungry, Humble, Smart is the following. Let's start with humble. Humble, humility is a key component really in everything in terms of success, and certainly in terms of leadership. We've talked about it with respect to leadership. Moses, the most humble person of all. But really when I talk about leadership in general, becoming a great leader, humility is at the core of that. In fact, in doing the research for today, so in the work called Sichat Musar, it's a book by Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz, he asked the question that we raised. It's like, how is it possible that Pharaoh goes about hiring Joseph to play this role? Joseph's a nothing. He's from the pit. He, until 10 minutes ago, was dirty and disgusting looking, and now he's being hired. And the truth is, Pharaoh was listening just as carefully as we talked about last year that Joseph was actively listening. Pharaoh is listening to the explanation, and he hears something in the explanation that is humility. The first moments that Joseph is brought before Pharaoh, Joseph deflects any sort of recognition or any sort of sense of owning the explanations. He defers all of that to God. The honor belongs to God. It is not me, it is not my wisdom, the wisdom belongs to God, all that stuff. Now, we could say that Joseph's having a religious moment, or Joseph is imposing some sense of God into the courtyard of Pharaoh. It wouldn't be the first time. Abraham did it too a couple of generations before. But it's more than that here. It's a sense of humility. Joseph interpreted dreams last week. That's new. Before that, he himself is a dreamer and has an understanding of his own dreams, but interpreting other people's dreams, getting deep into what they're thinking about, what's going on in their psyche, that's new for him. But in this space, in this place, in this courtyard, there is an incredible sense of humility that's coming off of Joseph, and Pharaoh picks up on it. Pharaoh picks up on the language of God as well, but he really picks up on the sense that Joseph, this person is humble. This person is deflecting. This person, if given the role, will accept it in the right way. The second virtue here is hungry. The person is going to work hard. They're going to do whatever it's necessary to help the team succeed. That is obvious. If a person is coming out of the pit, that's going to be true. If they're going to do the work, they're going to put in the time, they're going to put in the effort, they're going to max effort that project in a way and in a manner that's going to make someone like Pharaoh look good, be successful, and really bring the results that's going to happen. They're going to fill gaps. They're going to volunteer. They're going to go the extra mile, something we've talked about before, going above and beyond. They don't need to be pushed by anyone. They're going to do it themselves. That's the hungry part. We love hungry people in our work, right? You want to feed the lions, as some people like to talk about. The lions are the hungry ones. They want to do the work. They're going to go after it. So humble, hungry, and smart. And it's not simply being about intelligent, but you're wise. You're able to deal with people. You know how this is going to work. You're going to know how this is going to develop. These are people, you appreciate the dynamics of what's going on here. You understand how actions impact, words impact. Judgment has a role here. Intuition is going to be crucial here. All of these things make these people ideal team players. The mixture of a team that's humble, hungry, smart is the mix of a very powerful team. Now, all of these skills, they're actually skills, because I think they're teachable. A person can be worked on to become more humble. A person can be worked on to become more hungry. A person can become smarter, because the smarts here isn't just about, how to build a project. This is about also some of the what we call the soft smart skills. Those are teachable. That's the empathy piece that we've talked about in the past. That's the piece of how to talk to teammates, to get teammates in and working with you and along with you and alongside you, how to articulate problems, how to appreciate where people are in those spaces. All that stuff is teachable and workable. And what I think that's also that comes in here in the smarts and in the hungry section is something that Pharaoh loves, which is the idea that Joseph, in his thinking, in his strategy, in his approach, is highly proactive. Highly proactive means that Joseph is abiding by the first of the 7 habits of highly effective people. Being proactive. Joseph's entire case to be made for the person to lead this role and for what the task is to get out ahead of it, to be out in front of it, to anticipate all the things that are going to happen, and to work from that space. And Pharaoh loves it. The idea that a Pharaoh who believes himself and holds himself out to be a god can be ahead of the idea, ahead of the plan that coming in 7 years is a famine that gives him more godlike power. The ability to influence that, the ability to control that, the ability to operate on that will only make you more powerful, more godlike, larger. Coming from proactivism. Instead of being reactive, would be the waiting out and seeing that, it's getting bad, the weather's getting worse, fields aren't growing, and now we're reacting to the situation. Joseph has put him in a situation where he is 7 years ahead of the problem. And in doing so, he then says, you should appoint a person who's going to do X and Y and Z, who's going to, collect the food, who's going to spread it out, who's going to operate in a moment of abundance, with the sense that we have sense of scarcity in a moment of abundance, right? That idea that, yes, we have a lot now, but we want to have even more later, so let's hold a little bit now. Let's not use everything. Let's not spend all of our capital in these first 7 years. Let's use it when we're going to need it. That's proactivism. That is, as Covey said, is the number one habit. The first habit which allows you the possibility of the other habits. It's when you're operating, as we talked about multiple times in season 1, operating in the circle of influence rather than the circle of concern. The circle of concern are the things that we don't control. As much as Pharaoh is some sort of a godlike figure, he doesn't necessarily control the weather. That's something that he's concerned about, that they're all concerned about. It's not something that they can control or do anything about. What they can do in the proactive mode is operate in the circle of influence. And the circle of influence is where Pharaoh operates. That's what makes him powerful. Joseph's going to put him into a greater space of influence by being hyper proactive now. Focus on what you can control. The things that we can do, the habits that we can implement, the strategies that we can establish, the execution plan for how we're going to operate over the next 7 years. That's where you have influence. That's where you have control. That's where you get smart. And Pharaoh hears from this young person standing before him, humble, hungry, smart, and he hires him for the job. It's as quote unquote as simple as that. Now, the reality in our own lives is that, as I said, we can work on some of those skills, and a lot of the time we'll find with ourselves that, hopefully we're all 3, but at certain points we're 2 of the 3, where maybe we're hungry and humble, we're not so smart. Sometimes we're hungry and smart, we're not so humble. And so when you look at Lencioni's writings, you'll see him delineate all kinds of variations and give fun titles to those different kinds of mixes, where you can then work on a person to become better, or work with a person to become better in those streets, to become more of an ideal teammate, to more of an ideal team leader, even potentially. And so Joseph not only becomes a great team player, he becomes really the agent of change here under the auspices and the power structure that is a Pharaoh power structure. And he is going to articulate that. He's going to lead from the front as an effective communicator, an effective project manager, and someone who is going to really be in charge. There's clearly the sense that that's true, the sense of accountability and integrity that's coming off of Joseph, the sense of focus on success, the sense of being a motivator, all those things, and at the same time giving the credit to Pharaoh makes Joseph the ideal hire. I know that when we look at the story here of Joseph, we don't look at it from a hiring perspective. Totally get that. But I think it's important for us to appreciate that, in fact, he was interviewing for a position, and he knew that he was interviewing for a position, and Pharaoh knew that he was interviewing for a position, although I don't think anybody else knew that he was necessarily interviewing for a position at that moment, and he went for it. That other piece of that go-getter, that whole go-getter piece is an important piece of Joseph too, but it is beyond the scope of today. So here again, we're looking at the idea of how we hire, how we can assess our teams, humble, hungry, smart, the ideal team player, that notion as it comes out of the story of Joseph, and how it effectively can be implemented and employed in our own entities, in our own places of work, in our own teams, and in our own lives. After we post the podcast for this week, I'll also post a couple of the PDFs about Humble, Hungry, Smart, in terms of what those things are. A couple of links with respect to some of the other setups of those three styles where people are missing some. I think those are interesting points. And also a link to an assessment tool that you can even assess. You can assess team players, people on your teams, through this structure. So it's not just simply a hiring structure, but it's a way of developing the people on the team as well and making them better overall by assessing them in these areas, in these traits, in these spaces over the course of time that they're working with you. So that is coaching with the Bible for this week. Humble, hungry, and smart, hiring the ideal team player, hiring the ideal team leader. The interview, that is Joseph's interview in the courtyard of Pharaoh. Have a great week. Those of you, to everyone, of course, those of you celebrating Shabbat, have a Shabbat Shalom. Those of you celebrating Chanukah, happy Chanukah to you. Let's bring the light into the world. Let's bring light into our lives. Let's light up every single day that we are here. It is a great time, great time to be alive. Take care.